Usually when we think about a crime scene today, there's this strict expectation of just absolute microscopic precision.
Right, like a surgical theater or something.
Yeah, exactly. We picture the yellow tape going up, the investigators in those full-body white suits, and they're hunting for, something as small as a single discarded eyelash.
Oh, totally. The entire space is treated as this sterile, sacred vessel of truth.
Right, because we expect science to just immediately lock down the environment. So the physical world can simply record the event, and investigators can just read the tape.
Which is, it's incredibly comforting for us today.
It really is. But when you step back into the history of criminal investigation, that sterile laboratory just completely vanishes. Like, it's gone.
Oh, yeah. It's a completely different world.
It is. We find ourselves looking at this historical landscape that is, honestly, it's terrifying in its chaos. So welcome back to another deep dive. I am so glad you could join us today because we are going on a serious journey.
We really are. We've pulled from a massive stack of sources for you on this one.
Yeah, we've got archival newspaper reports, behavioral analysis from that brilliant book, The Man from the Train, and some really cutting-edge modern case studies from a DNA lab called Offram.
It's a wild mix of sources.
It is. And our mission today, we are exploring the fascinating and honestly sometimes baffling evolution of criminal investigation. We're going to start with one of America's most infamous historical cold cases, the 1912 Villisca Axe Murders, and contrast its completely botched investigation with the modern, mind-blowing forensic genetic genealogy being pioneered today. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, think about the stark juxtaposition we're dealing with here. A century ago, a crime scene could be completely, utterly destroyed by curious neighbors literally taking souvenirs from the victim.
Just the thought of that.
I know, it's horrific. But then fast forward to today, and scientists can solve a 60-year-old murder using like an invisible speck of DNA that almost got washed away in a winter storm.
It's just wild.
It really highlights not just the advancement of our technology, but, the evolution of our entire psychological approach to justice.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's set the historical scene for you. It's June 9, 1912, Villisca, Iowa. It's this quiet, prosperous town, a major stop on the Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy Railroad.
A very typical bustling Midwestern hub for the time.
Right. And Josiah and Sarah Moore, their 4 children, and 2 visiting guests, the Stillinger sisters, they all go to sleep. And sometime in the middle of the night, a killer enters the home.
Yeah.
All 8 people, including 6 children, are murdered in their sleep.
And the specific methods used by this killer, the modus operandi, they are incredibly chilling, highly ritualistic.
Very specific, right?
Oh, extremely. First, consider the weapon itself. The killer didn't even bring his own weapon. He used Josiah Moore's own axe, which had just been left out in the yard.
Wow.
And he primarily used the blunt end of the axe to bludgeon the victims.
Which, that requires a terrifying level of physical force.
It does. It suggests a desire for maximum brutal impact rather than just an efficient kill.
Reading that in the archival sources, it's a detail that just stops you in your tracks.
Yeah.
But the scene gets even more complex, right?
Yeah, it gets really bizarre. The killer took the time to cover the mirrors in the house with clothing.
He covered the mirrors.
Yeah, and he covered the faces of the victims with sheets after they were dead. He also took an oil lamp, removed the glass chimney, and literally bent the wick over to keep the flame as low and dim as possible.
Just to navigate the house in the dark?
Exactly. Then we find the behavioral markers that completely baffled early investigators. Before leaving, the killer cleans the axe, leaves a bowl of bloody water behind, and get this, places a slab of raw bacon next to the murder weapon.
Wait, a slab of raw bacon. For anyone listening, that just sounds like pure madness.
It does sound crazy. But today, behavioral analysts look at that and see a very specific psychological fingerprint.
Like a decompression ritual.
Exactly. Leaving the bacon in the bowl of water suggests a killer who is taking their time, performing a post-kill cleaning ritual. That is a crucial distinction.
Because it means he wasn't in a rush to flee.
Right. A killer who lingers at a scene to perform bizarre rituals is decompensating. This points to a highly disorganized, fantasy-driven psychopath.
Okay, so they're acting out an internal compulsion.
Yes, which is vastly different from, say, a financially motivated criminal who just wants to get in, get the money, and get out as quickly as possible.
That makes so much sense. So Monday morning rolls around, the bodies are discovered, and here is where the investigation just goes completely off the rails.
Oh, it's a disaster.
It's like hosting a public open house during a tornado.
Yeah.
Over 100 townspeople literally pushed their way inside the house.
100 people?
Yeah. The town marshal simply lets people wander through the residence to look at the victims,
They actively trampled the scene. People were picking up the murder weapon and just passing it around.
passing the axe around. And perhaps the most grotesque detail from the reports is that some of the locals actually took fragments of the victims' shattered skulls as souvenirs.
It's so hard to comprehend today.
They were treating a mass murder site like a macabre tourist attraction, while the blood was literally still wet.
What's fascinating here is how the primitive state of 1912 forensics perfectly collided with this contaminated scene to create an absolute void of evidence.
Just a black hole.
Exactly. Even if the marshal had managed to keep the crowd out, law enforcement had virtually zero scientific tools. Fingerprinting was barely in its infancy.
And certainly not systematically available in rural Iowa.
Right. Blood typing wasn't a forensic tool yet. DNA analysis was over 70 years away.
I mean, the coroner didn't even bother to take notes on the condition of the bodies.
Which leaves the police force looking at a crime scene that has been obliterated by 100 curious neighbors. They had absolutely no way to objectively catch the killer.
Zero.
And when you have no physical evidence, human nature takes over. You rely on local gossip, grudges, and paranoia.
Because they have to blame someone.
Right. The investigators simply assumed the killer had to be local because investigating within their own town limits was literally the only thing they knew how to do.
And that jurisdictional blindness leads us perfectly into the absolute circus of suspects. Because they had no physical evidence, the town basically tore itself apart looking for a scapegoat.
It really did.
The primary target was a man named F.F. Jones. He was a wealthy local state senator, and he was a business rival of Josiah Moore.
Yeah, the tractor dispute.
Right. So a private detective named James Newton Wilkerson came into town a few years later and built this massive, elaborate conspiracy theory. Wilkerson claimed Jones was furious that Moore had taken the lucrative John Deere tractor account away from him.
And that Moore was allegedly having an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law.
Yes. So Wilkerson's argument was that Jones hired a labor organizer named William Mansfield to commit the murders as a form of ultimate retribution.
A hitman, basically.
Right. But, okay, I have to push back on this local killer theory. For you listening, think about the behavioral evidence we just discussed. Does hiring a hitman over a tractor dispute in a local affair explain a guy bending an oil lamp wick, covering every mirror in the house, and leaving a slab of raw bacon next to a bowl of bloody water?
No, of course not.
That doesn't sound like a professional contract killing. That sounds like the highly specific, deeply disturbed ritual of a psychopath that we discussed earlier.
Exactly. You are applying modern behavioral logic, which completely dismantles the hitman theory. It makes no psychological sense.
It really doesn't.
The other major local suspect was Reverend George Kelly. He was this itinerant English preacher who happened to be in town that night.
Oh, this guy.
Yeah, he was a deeply troubled individual, a convicted sexual predator, and a suspected arsonist. He actually confessed to the murders, claiming God told him to slay the children.
But his confession was completely inconsistent with the physical layout of the scene, and the lack of any actual evidence was so glaring that juries acquitted him twice.
Right. He was just a convenient scapegoat for a terrified town that desperately wanted to believe the monster was someone they could see and lock away.
Totally.
But if we step back from the local town gossip and look at the broader historical data, a much more chilling and, frankly, much more logical theory emerges.
This is where we bring in the phenomenal research from the book The Man from the Train by Bill and Rachel McCarthy James, because they dug deep into newspaper archives from the era and found something absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, Villisca wasn't an isolated incident.
Not at all.
Between 1898 and 1912, there were scores of these family annihilations across the country, particularly in the Midwest. Colorado Springs, Monmouth, Illinois, Paola, Kansas.
And the authors proposed that a traveling serial killer named Paul Mueller was responsible for Villisca and potentially over 100 other murders.
100.
When you map out the MO of these other crimes, the dots connect perfectly. Striking homes near railroad junctions.
Choosing families that didn't have dogs to raise an alarm.
Yes, using the blunt edge of an axe found on the property. Covering the windows from the inside, leaving valuables and cash completely untouched. And, horrifyingly, a sadistic attraction to prepubescent girls.
Which aligns exactly with the Stillinger sisters in Villisca.
Exactly.
This is a textbook behavioral signature. It is a serial killer refining his craft. And the reason local police didn't connect these identical murders is due to something called linkage blindness.
Linkage blindness.
Right. In 1912, local police departments literally couldn't communicate across state lines in any meaningful, systematic way. If a murder happened in Kansas on a Tuesday, the police in Iowa wouldn't know the specifics of that crime scene by Sunday.
So the killer would just hop a freight train, literally the man from the train, ride a few hundred miles, cross a county line, commit the exact same ritualistic murder, and vanish before the bodies were even cold.
Yeah, the primitive communication and investigative tools of the era basically gave him a cloak of invisibility.
It's terrifying to think about.
And because he was never caught, and because the Villisca case remained officially unsolved, it left this massive psychological wound in that community. It is a classic example of what happens when a crime lacks closure.
It mutates. It goes from a historical tragedy into a myth and eventually into macabre tourism.
Oh, the tourism aspect.
Yeah. Let's look at the physical journey of the house today. For decades after 1912, the Moore house just decayed. It had this incredibly high turnover of renters who would stay a few weeks and bolt, claiming it was haunted.
Right, the ghost story started early.
They did. Then in the 1990s, Darwin and Martha Lynn bought the property. Darwin was a local historian, and they used old photographs and interviews to restore the house to the exact condition it was in on the night of the murders.
They went as far as ripping out the modern plumbing and the electricity to really enforce that 1912 atmosphere.
They completely took it back in time. And then they opened it for daytime tours and overnight stays. It is now famously known as the Villisca Axe Murder House.
It's a whole business.
It was even featured on season 4 of Ghost Adventures, which naturally attracts a very specific demographic of amateur paranormal investigators.
Which led to a rather dark incident in 2014, highlighting our strange relationship with unresolved trauma.
Yeah, this is so sad. A 37-year-old amateur ghost hunter was staying overnight. He was alone in the exact downstairs room where the Skillinger sisters had slept. Around 12:45 a.m., he literally stabbed himself in the chest.
Wow.
He survived, thankfully, but later claimed he was trying to provoke the spirits and had no memory of actually stabbing himself.
This raises an important question, doesn't it? When a case lacks scientific closure, our obsession with the macabre often completely overshadows the very real human tragedy of a family being slaughtered.
That ghost hunter was literally trying to fill a 100-year-old evidence void with the paranormal. Because in 1912, once a scene was trampled by 100 people, the physical truth was gone forever. It just evaporated.
It was gone.
But imagine if that exact same trampled, chaotic scene happened today. Imagine if we could reach back into that void.
If we could do that, it wouldn't be a ghost story anymore. It would be a solved case.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Today, we have the ultimate counterweapon to the bungled 1912 investigation. We are talking about forensic genetic genealogy.
A total game changer.
And to understand this paradigm shift, we have to look at a company that is absolutely revolutionizing cold cases right now. Othram. They're a DNA lab based in Texas, and they are doing things that sound like pure science fiction.
They really do. Othram uses a proprietary technology they call forensic-grade genome sequencing. And to understand why this is such a massive leap, we have to look at the limitations of traditional DNA testing.
Okay.
Usually, police collect a DNA sample and run it through CODIS, which is the national database of known criminal offenders.
So if the killer has never been arrested before, they simply aren't in CODIS. Traditional police work hits a brick wall because it's a binary system. You are either in the database or you get a dead end.
Exactly. Othram shatters that binary system. They don't need the killer to be in a police database. They extract the DNA and look at hundreds of thousands of markers, specifically SNPs or single nucleotide polymorphisms.
Right. And for you listening, think of traditional CODIS testing, like checking if a book's title matches a database. If the title isn't there, you learn nothing. But SNPs are completely different. Analyzing SNPs is like scanning every single letter on every single page of that book to find highly specific, unique typos.
Typos that you only share with your distant blood relatives.
Exactly.
That is a perfect analogy. Othram builds an incredibly comprehensive genetic profile of those microscopic typos, and then they use commercial genealogy databases to find the suspect's distant relatives. Second cousins, third cousins.
And then they build a family tree backward from those cousins until they find the one branch that leads to this specific suspect who was in the right place at the right time.
They triangulate an identity through the bloodline.
It is stunning. And the sources we reviewed are packed with examples of Othram pulling off the impossible. Let's look at some of these because they perfectly illustrate the mechanics of this science.
There are so many good examples.
Like in 1978, someone was doing a home renovation in Batavia, Illinois, and they found a human skull hidden in the wall. It just sat in an evidence box for over 45 years.
Finally, officials sent it to Othram. Using this advanced sequencing, they didn't just find out who it was, they reached back across centuries. They identified the skull as belonging to Esther Granger, a teenager who died in 1866.
Wait, to pull DNA from bone marrow that old, how does the DNA not just completely break down into useless dust after a century and a half?
That is the genius of their proprietary method. Traditional labs often fail because old DNA is highly degraded by sunlight, bacteria, or chemicals.
Like embalming fluids.
Yes. For instance, if a sample was treated with formaldehyde, that chemical acts like a genetic superglue. It fuses the DNA strands together so traditional testing machines just can't unzip and read them.
Oh,
But Othram's technology acts like a highly advanced microscopic solvent. It bypasses that cross-linking to read the degraded fragments.
And they managed to locate Esther's living great-great-grandson, a 69-year-old man, and confirm the match. From a skull sitting in a wall since right after the Civil War.
It's incredible.
And it's not just about how old the DNA is, it is about how incredibly little of it they need. There was the case of Mary Teresa Simpson, a 12-year-old girl murdered in Elmira, New York in 1964. The case went cold for 60 years. The FBI finally sent the absolute last remaining shred of evidence to Othram.
And Othram successfully processed just zero point 0.4 nanograms of DNA.
To ground that for you listening, zero point 0.4 nanograms is so small that if you wiped your thumb on your phone screen right now, you just left behind exponentially more DNA than Othram used to solve his 60-year-old murder.
It's almost nothing.
It is roughly the equivalent of maybe 60 human cells. Oh, and that tiny sample almost got lost in transit during a historic winter storm. But it made it, Othram sequenced it, mapped the typos, built the tree, and positively identified her killer.
It is a testament to the sheer sensitivity of the technology. And, this isn't just for dusty cold cases. This is actively shaping modern, high-profile investigations where traditional methods fail.
Like the tragic Brian Kohberger case, the Idaho college student murders. When 4 students were killed in Moscow, Idaho, investigators found a cow bar knife sheath left on a bed. They found a trace amount of DNA on the button snap of that sheath. They ran it through CODIS, and it was a complete dead end because he had no prior record.
Right, so Idaho State Police contracted Othram. Othram built the profile from that trace DNA. The FBI used it to build the family tree, and that triangulation is what led them directly to Brian Kohberger as the primary suspect.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, why is this paradigm shift so important for the future of justice?
Because it completely bypasses the traditional gatekeepers of forensics. For decades, if a crime scene was contaminated, like our open house in Villisca, or if the sample was chemically treated, degraded by the elements, or just too small, traditional crime labs would say, sorry, insufficient sample, put it in a box.
Just file it away.
But Othram was purpose-built to handle the exact evidence that everyone else throws away.
It means an investigator no longer needs a pristine, sterile crime scene. They can take a bone that has been sitting at the bottom of a river for 30 years and pull a name out of it. It means a killer can no longer rely on time, the elements, or even their own lack of a criminal record to hide their identity.
It forces accountability on a molecular level.
So, bringing this all together for you listening, think about the incredible arc we have just traveled. We started in 1912 in a farmhouse in Villisca, Iowa. A crime scene so thoroughly botched that the townspeople were walking off with pieces of the victims' skulls.
Such a stark contrast.
A time when a serial killer could literally just hop on a train, cross a county line, and ride away into the night because police departments couldn't even make a long-distance phone call to compare notes. A time when a lack of science forced communities to turn on themselves and invent ghost stories to fill the void.
We moved from a world of linkage blindness to a world of molecular omniscience.
Exactly. We are living in an era where a murderer can leave behind a few dozen skin cells on a knife sheath or a single drop of sweat, and scientists in a lab in Texas can trace that invisible speck through generations of a family tree to knock on their front door decades later. It is a fundamental, awe-inspiring shift in how we hold darkness accountable.
It truly is. But as powerful as this technology is, delving into Othram's data also illuminates the sheer scale of the work we still have left to do, which leaves us with a rather sobering thought to consider.
Tell us.
Currently, in the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, MUS, there are over 15,000 cases of unidentified human remains sitting in the database.
Wow, 15,000.
15,000 John and Jane Does. But researchers at Othram have looked at the data and estimate that at least 600 of these cases are what they classify as hidden homicides.
Meaning these are murders that haven't even been classified as crimes yet. Because the victims are unknown, the circumstances of their deaths are completely uninvestigated, the killers aren't just getting away with murder, the justice system doesn't even realize a murder took place.
Which leaves you with this to ponder. How many other century-old mysteries, how many modern-day Villiscas are sitting in cardboard boxes right now, completely misclassified, just waiting for a single swab of DNA to rewrite history?
It brings us right back to that opening image, doesn't it? The vast difference between a muddy footprint trampled into the floorboards by 100 chaotic neighbors and a single microscopic cell waiting patiently under a microscope. The evidence has always been there. We're just finally learning how to read the tape. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we'll see you next time.